This is the most beautiful iPhone that I have ever seen. This is the iPhone 13 Pro Max and it's liquid-cooled. And not just any liquid, but a very special liquid that changes color when exposed to high temperatures. Today we re-gone. Find out what happens when you push this iPhone to its absolute limit, and see if we can keep it alive with the help of a cooling system. Welcome everybody to my channel. It is me here and you can find me on social media. Now if you follow me or if you use an iPhone, then you know that the new iPhone 13 line is finally bringing in some big changes like a new design, a larger camera system, better cameras all around, and for the first time in years, a notch that isn't completely obnoxious. But there is one more change that is quite meaningful that Apple didn't really talk about at all during their keynote, and that is the fact that the internals of these phones are now 50% more efficient than before. And while Apple has been working on this new architecture for a long time, they did not mention the reason why they needed to make these chips more efficient. Well, that's because Apple has secretly been pushing the limits of what silicon can handle. I mean, sure, we've seen Apple increase the number of cores over time, and even bump up the clock speeds to record levels. But aside from these performance increases, Apple has also doubled the amount of transistors, which basically means double the heat. If you take a look at the A-series chips over the past few generations, you will notice that the die size keeps increasing and increasing, and that is due to the increased transistor count. The A14 Bionic was the first chip to break the 10 billion transistor barrier, and now the new A15 Bionic has 15 billion transistors. Doubling the transistors essentially doubles the potential for heat. Now, doubling the performance does mean generating roughly double the amount of heat. So even though Apple has worked hard to make the A15 more efficient, it still generates more heat than before. And that means we're going to be seeing higher sustained performance, but also higher sustained temperatures. In fact, the iPhone 13 Pro Max has already broken the record for the hottest iPhone ever made, topping out at 42 degrees Celsius. So today we push the iPhone 13 Pro Max to its absolute limit with a stress test, and see if we can keep it alive by adding a liquid cooling system. And if you're wondering why I didn't just use an iPhone 13 mini, well that's because the 13 mini doesn't have the 120Hz display that the 13 Pro Max has. And that higher refresh rate display is going to be one of the reasons we're seeing such high temperatures. So if we want to see these phones get hot, we should do it with a high refresh rate display enabled. So to do this, I bought the iOptron IK3 with a custom-made adapter to attach to an iPhone 13 Pro Max. This device uses liquid nitrogen to cool your iPhone, and I've used it before with great results. In fact, this thing is so powerful that it was able to bring down the temperature of my overclocked iPhone 12 Pro Max from 88 degrees Celsius down to room temperature in less than 2 minutes. But there is one big problem here, and that is the fact that the iPhone doesn't actually expose the temperature sensor to the outside world. Instead, the only part of the phone that makes contact with the outside world is the glass. And if we apply a cold compress to the glass, we might be able to influence the internal temperature, but it's unlikely. The best case scenario is that the glass and the internals are in direct contact, meaning that the cold glass will draw heat away from the internals and lower the overall temperature. The worst case scenario is that there is a large thermal barrier between the glass and the internals, meaning that the cold glass won't influence the internals at all. In order to maximize our chances of influencing the internal temperature of the iPhone, we're going to go with the thinnest thermal interface possible, a single sheet of thermal tape. So let's go ahead and get this set up. Remove the back glass and the frame and place a sheet of thermal tape where the battery meets the frame. Now we're going to reassemble the phone without the back glass. Feed the tubes through the lightning port and plug them into the iOptron unit, and then apply liquid nitrogen to the phone. Finally, we're going to add the back glass and frame to complete the process. Now, typically I would attach the back glass using double-sided tape. But since we're working with liquid nitrogen, I don't want to risk puncturing the tube on the other side. So I am just hold it in place for now. Alright, so it's time to run a stress test and find out what happens when you push an iPhone to its absolute limit. Now historically, I've ran these tests using Geekbench 5, because it maxes out the CPU and GPU cores, giving us a good indication of how the phone will behave under extreme loads. However, Apple has recently changed the way Geekbench 5 runs on iOS 15, and it no longer pushes the CPU and GPU cores to their maximum potential. And if we want to push this phone to its absolute limit and find out what it's capable of, we need to put it through a more intense test. For that, we're going to be using GFX Bench, which is a graphics benchmark that really pushes the Apple G. And we going to be running the Aztec Ruins high-tier test, which is the most intense test available. It pushes the GPU to 100% capacity for 60 seconds, which should easily get the iPhone really hot. But wait a second, where's the heatsink? Shouldn't the iPhone be attached to the heatsink? Well, it turns out that Apple includes a heatsink inside the iPhone. Look at that! That's a pretty nice piece of machined aluminum right there. And that's actually the part that makes contact with the internals of the phone. So with that in mind, we should be able to replace that heatsink with our own custom solution. And if we can do that, then it would be super easy to apply a cold compress directly to the heatsink and achieve an extremely low temperature. But unfortunately, it looks like this area of the phone is glued down. And if you try to pry it up, you're likely going to break the camera assembly. So instead keep the stock heatsink in place and focus on making contact with the glass. Now I did read online that the iPhone 13 Pros have a slightly different design, and that the heatsink is no longer glued in place. But I am still going to assume that it is, and I am not going to try to pry it up. After all, this is just a simple stress test, and the iPhone should be able to handle this kind of workload for a short period of time. Alright, let's run the test and find out what happens. Okay, so things aren't looking good. I can already tell that the temperature is rising fast, and if we hit 42 degrees Celsius, the phone is going to shut itself off. That's why I wrapped the camera module in Kapton tape. Since the heatsink is glued in place, I wanted to make sure that we weren't getting any heat transfer through the frame. Okay, we're at 40 degrees Celsius, and the test still isn't finished. Oh, there goes 41 and 42, and here comes 43. Oh my goodness, can this phone handle it? Please don't shut off. Come on, dude, you got this. There we go, it's done. Let us check out the results and see if we can actually improve on these numbers with the Now, if we take a look at the results, you'll notice that we had a pretty high average, but it's the minimum that's important. That's the lowest temperature that the phone achieved during the entire test, and that number tells us exactly what the temperature was after the phone had time to cool down. So the final temperature of this phone was 39.8 degrees Celsius, which is insanely hot. But how does that compare to the iPhone? Well, let's find out. Alright, so we've got everything hooked up and ready to go. Let's run the test and see if we can keep this phone alive. Alright, we're almost there. We're at 41, 42, and 43 degrees Celsius, and the test still isn't finished. That's incredible. We have to give this phone a standing ovation. Wait until this thing is done. I am blown away by these results. Okay, so let's check out the results and see if we were able to beat the previous temperature. Now, if we scroll down to the minimum, you'll notice that we were able to drop the temperature by nearly 10 degrees Celsius, which is absolutely insane. The iOptron was able to bring the temperature down to 30.3 degrees Celsius, which is nearly 10 degrees of thermal headroom. That's incredible. So yeah, I would say that this iPhone is alive and well, and thanks to the iOptron, it's going to be able to run this benchmark all day long. And that is pretty much it. Those are the coolest iPhones I've ever seen. And hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please make sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe so you don't miss any more of my videos. If you did enjoy the video, one of my favorites is the thermal crossover. It's one of my favorite videos I've ever made, so please check it out. I think you'll really enjoy it. This has been me. You can find me on social media, and I will see you all in the next one.